In the early 20th century, the Russian Empire faced political and economic collapse. Living standards kept falling. A crisis began in agriculture worsened by poor harvests. Peasants comprising 70% of the population merely existed rather than lived, practically starving. Civil rights and freedoms were a fiction. Corruption and impunity thrived among officials and royals. A revolution was brewing. And to distract the population from its problems, Russian Interior Minister Vyacheslav Plehve proposed a short victorious war against Japan. This doctrine ran like a red thread through Russia's history for the next century and eventually became a tragicomic meme. Because the war against Japan, like many later conflicts started by Russia, turned out to be neither small nor victorious. But at that time, Japan was an easy scapegoat in the Tsar's mind.
It is also worth mentioning the personal factor. Japanese policeman. This is an expression that replaces swearing, but it has a backstory. In 1891, the heir to the Russian throne, the future Nicholas II, traveled the world with friends for entertainment and education. He behaved impolitely from the point of view of Japanese customs. And a Japanese policeman struck him with a saber in the scabbard, causing little harm. But this has become the subject of anecdotes. 5 years later, becoming Tsar, Nicholas II kept a negative view of the Japanese and called them nothing but macaques before the war.
The Russo-Japanese War was fought for dominance in the Far East, with both empires aiming to control Manchuria and Korea. During this war, Russia kept getting beaten on land and at sea, but the symbol of the greatest disgrace in this war was the Battle of Tsushima, the largest naval battle since the 1805 Battle of Trafalgar. This catastrophe was preceded by a 7-month voyage of the Russian squadron to the Far East.
The thing is, in October 1904, the Russians sent the 2nd Pacific Squadron from the Baltic Sea, through the Atlantic Ocean, around Africa, then the Indian Ocean, all the way to the Far East.
This squadron was meant to turn the tide of the Russo-Japanese War. It was commanded by Zinovy Rozhestvensky, who was reluctant to engage the Japanese fleet and doubted success. Because of this, he asked to resign several times, but the response was, "Bring victory first, then you can retire with honors."
Later, the Russians sent a 3rd Pacific Squadron to support Rozhestvensky's forces, this time by a shorter route. But it never joined with the 2nd Squadron because it was defeated at Port Arthur.
So Rozhestvensky's squadron was doomed. But Petersburg was undeterred. They were ordered to break through to the Far East and fight until a victorious end. Rozhestvensky chose the Tsushima Strait route. The Japanese fleet under Admiral Heihachiro Togo awaited him there. Both sides had roughly equal numbers of ships.
Under Heihachiro's command were 4 battleships, 8 armored cruisers, 19 cruisers, destroyers, torpedo boats, and support vessels. A total of 31 ships. Rozhestvensky deployed 8 battleships, 1 armored cruiser, 3 coastal defense battleships, 8 cruisers, and 9 destroyers. A total of 29 ships.
However, Japan's fleet overwhelmingly outmatched the enemy in other aspects. The Japanese had many more cruisers and destroyers, their crew was motivated, experienced in naval battles, and much better shooters than the Russians. Japanese ships were much faster and more maneuverable, and their intelligence worked brilliantly. So Admiral Heihachiro was aware of every enemy move, and the Russians were demotivated and exhausted from the month-long journey across half the world.
Even such a factor as a more favorable color of the ships played a role. For the Japanese, it was gray and practically blended with the color of the sea and sky, while the Russian squadron went into battle almost like at a parade. Just imagine, black ships with yellow smokestacks, a perfect target for Japanese gunners.
By the way, Heihachiro Togo began his career in the British Royal Navy. It's no surprise that the hero Togo sought to emulate was Horatio Nelson. Following the British hero of the Battle of Trafalgar, the Japanese admiral sent a message to the enemy before the battle at Tsushima. The fate of the empire depends on the outcome of this battle. Let everyone do their best. The naval battle started on May 27th. Its fate was decided within the first few hours, as the Japanese quickly destroyed the main forces of the enemy squadron. The Japanese first targeted the Russian flagship near Suvorov, carrying Rozhestvensky. The Russian admiral was seriously wounded by shrapnel, transferred to the destroyer Obini, and handed command of the squadron to Rear Admiral Nikolai Nebogaytov.
It seemed impossible even to count the number of shells that hit us. Not only had I never witnessed such a fire before, but I had never even imagined anything like it. It seemed like shells were raining down on us continuously, one after another. Steel plates and the superstructure on the upper decks were torn to pieces, and the shrapnel caused many casualties. The iron ladders were crushed into rings, and the guns were literally thrown from their mounts. In addition, there was an unusually high temperature and a liquid flame from the explosion that seemed to spread everywhere. I actually watched the steel plate catch fire from the explosion.
As darkness fell, most of the surviving Russian ships desperately tried to break through to Vladivostok. But Togo had no intention of letting a juicy target escape and ordered his destroyers and torpedo boats to continue the attack. At that time, ships were not equipped with radar, so the night pursuit turned into a series of clashes. Ship to ship, some Russian ships foolishly turned on spotlights to see their attackers. Instead, they made themselves an even easier target for torpedo attacks. The Battle of Tsushima ended on May 28. It ended in a complete, grand, and humiliating defeat for the Russian fleet.
To grasp the scale of the Russian fiasco, of Rozhestvensky's 38 ships, 21 sank, 7 were captured, 6 retreated to neutral ports and were interned, and 1 returned to the Baltic. And only 1 light cruiser and 2 destroyers completed the task, breaking through to Vladivostok. 5,045 sailors died, 7,282 were captured, and 2,110 were interned. Japanese casualties were 43 times fewer, with only 3 small torpedo boats destroyed.
Admiral Rozhestvensky, who sustained severe injuries including to the head, was treated in a Japanese hospital where he was visited by Heihachi Togo. Then he returned to Russia, but died of a heart attack a few years later. The Tsushima defeat led to the collapse of Russia's Far Eastern expansion, the swift end of the war with Japan, and became a catalyst for revolutionary movements in the Russian Empire.